Is college a scam? I spoke to several experts to find out. A few weeks ago, I was going through my very unorganized boxes of documents and hard drives to find some old footage to use in a video about algorithms, when I stumbled upon my literal college degree, cramped in a folder, a little tattered. I'm not sure if it was indifference I felt towards that very expensive endeavor I chose to go through as a 17-year-old child, or resentment towards what it cost my family. Either way, that piece of paper doesn't matter much to me now. Flat out declaring college is a scam feels good to say, but it's the kind of statement we make when we want a clear villain. Although the feeling underneath it is real, and as someone with a communications degree, I've definitely felt it. Because for a long time, there was a deal. You went to college, you did the work, and your life started moving. Maybe not perfectly, but predictably enough to plan around. The predictability was the actual value. And the thing people reach for when they say scam is the suspicion that it's now gone. What happens when the conventional path fades into the dirt? And whose fault is it? Some of what changed wasn't about jobs at all. It was the way we started thinking. Elizabeth Popp Berman, a sociologist at the University of Michigan, has written multiple books about how cost-benefit reasoning crept into nearly every corner of American life, including how we pay for school.
There was a point at which we started to think about college primarily in terms of its economic payoffs, and we also started to think that because the economic benefits of college go to the individual, that it made sense to finance college, at least partly through student loans.
College went from something a society paid for together to something an individual buys, on the theory that the individual will cash in later, all in an economy assumed to keep looking like the one their parents knew.
They're really not thinking of it in a calculative kind of way about, is X amount of student loans really worth what kind of salary I think I'm going to be earning 10 years down the road? It's just a leap of faith.
And this is a greater leap of faith than it used to be. Adjusted for inflation, published college tuition has risen roughly 312% at public institutions and 259% at nonprofit universities since 1963. The bill comes due as debt. Americans now owe collectively $1.84 trillion in outstanding student loans. With all that money on the line, you'd probably want to make a perfectly calculated bet. Except you can't, because nobody can see the labor market 10 years out. It is a leap of faith, but it's advertised like an investment you're supposed to make. But let's say you take that leap of faith and end up graduating. Now you need the first job. Not a dream job, but one to get you in the door to make the next one possible. Sarah Damaske, a sociologist at Penn State, studies what happens when that first job doesn't come. And her research on unemployment is blunt about the stakes.
The longer it takes you to find a job, the more likely you are to settle for a job that doesn't fit your skill set. There are long-term consequences in terms of your earnings, in terms of your ability to find an occupation that matches your skill, in terms of your health, both your physical and your mental health.
So why has the first rung gotten so hard to reach? Peter Cappelli has spent his career on that question. He runs Wharton Center for Human Resources, and he studies the part of this most people never see, how employers actually hire. When a posting requires 3 to 5 years of experience for an entry-level role, that doesn't mean the applicants fall short.
If you look at job ads, they're stunning in the requirements. Must have 3 to 5 years of work experience with our equipment. So they want somebody who could just come in and take over.
There's a bigger piece underneath that. Companies used to hire people green and then train them. After the recession of the early 80s, a lot of them stopped.
Companies sort of just started backing away from developing talent. They kind of just gave up on entry-level training. And if they needed to hire, there were millions, literally, of people who were trained, available to take those jobs.
Buying a worker who already has the skills, rather than building one, is cheaper for them. But it undermines the on-ramp a lot of the graduates used to rely on. And this shows up in the numbers. The New York Fed tracks recent graduates on their own. And as of early 2026, their unemployment rate sits around 5.7%, actually higher than the rate for workers overall. That's the strange part. For most of the past few decades, holding a degree meant you were less likely to be out of work than the average person, which, considering what you put into it, makes sense. And on top of that, roughly 4 in 10 recent grads are underemployed, working a job that never asked for the degree they got. The economist in the room would tell you to not read too much into any single pattern, though. Kathryn Anne Edwards is a PhD economist who runs her own economic policy research and consulting practice. She also posts a lot about all this, and thinks someone shouldn't put too much weight on their first job.
You shouldn't stay in that first job for too long. That jumping and moving is very good for your career, for your wage growth. Every time you start a new job, you learn a lot.
Both of what Edwards and Damaske said can be true. Edwards is describing a healthy career, where you move around and trade up over 15 years. Damaske is describing what happens when you can't move, when that gap drags on and that bad first job becomes the only job. The whole thing turns on whether the system leaves you enough room to recover. And when I say room, I mean money. And if you haven't heard, money's been tight. Wage growth has barely kept pace with prices for a few years now. But that's not really a recent grad problem. That's an everybody problem. When the money is tight, people want a reason why. Right now, a big reason is AI. It's a tidy story with an obvious villain. The people I talk to aren't buying it quite yet.
I haven't seen any data that's convincing. People are so desperate. They are desperately looking for proof that AI is taking jobs. I think the motivation for that search of let's find AI's impact, companies benefit from that mindset.
The evidence about job loss using AI is basically close to zero. Employers are feeling the pressure from investors to squeeze. They're always talking about efficiency now, which means doing more with less. You hear that, which means we're not taking the work away. We're just taking the people away and expecting you to do more. But they don't want to say that, really. So instead they say it's AI.
Whatever the cause of this lag in cost of living and wages, it doesn't fall evenly on everyone. Damaske is blunt about who absorbs the worst of it.
We know that Black college graduates are more vulnerable to unemployment. Workers who are Black just have higher risk of being in that first to be let go group. And they are also more likely to be hired last. So in the queue of who gets rehired, they have a longer period in which they're spending unemployed.
A longer stretch out of work means smaller savings, a steeper step down, and more exposure next time. First-generation college grads carry a lot of extra weight too. More debt, fewer cushions, no parents' health insurance to fall back on. All they did was be born in a more precarious spot. And this can put them in direct danger. Because when the money runs out, people often don't cut luxuries. They cut themselves.
They would say, my kid needs clothes, they need a backpack. I can go without my inhaler. I can share an inhaler with a neighbor. And I'm like, but you have a college education. You should know that sharing an inhaler with a neighbor seems, disastrous at worst and very risky at best.
People who did exactly what they were told would protect them, now rationing their own health. Modern day America. This cost never shows up in the salary numbers, let alone the stock market. But there's a fair pushback to all of this. Every generation thinks it had it hardest. Work harder, pick a better major. Choices do matter. But before we get to blaming anyone, it's worth answering the plain question underneath the whole scam thing. Does the degree still pay? On the numbers, it does. And it isn't close. Someone with a bachelor's earns about 2/3 more a week than someone with only a high school diploma. And over a working life, that gap adds up to roughly $1.2 million, about 75% more. So college is a scam, doesn't really hold up under the lifetime earnings data. But don't take it from me. Cappelli wrote a whole book on whether college pays off. And the short answer is that it depends enormously on what you study and where.
The idea that STEM degrees pay off is not true, but even in engineering, computer science now, graduates are having a really hard time. So you're rolling the dice here a lot.
The spread is wider than people assume. Median pay by field runs from around $58,000 to $98,000. And the gap between the highest and lowest paying majors is something like $3.5 million over a career. The degree isn't a scam. It also isn't a guarantee, but it's sold as one. Berman thinks we keep fighting about college partly because it's an easier fight to have than ones about more structural causes.
It's a lot harder to say how are we going to fix the whole labor market so that people have strong paths to economically sustainable careers regardless of what they majored in or what their education is.
Is college a scam? Is a lot simpler than the question, what do we owe people walking into a job market that we've let get this fragile? Maybe that's too complex for our hot take and mic drop culture, so we mostly skip it. The people I talk to don't really agree on if this will improve. Some are more hopeful than you'd expect, some less. And some are a tongue-in-cheek way of in-between.
I am an optimist because we've tried almost nothing. Most government effort has either been non-existent or so minimal it is if it is designed to not try at all. We haven't swung big in a really long time. I will feel less optimistic about the economy and our prospects if we swing big and miss.
But one thing that Damaske said stuck with me, because it's more of an insight than a prediction about the future, as she's watched a particular belief drain out of those trying to build their career.
People would have really crappy jobs and be convinced that the next job that came down the road would be better. This idea that something better is around the corner is much less present.
That belief that the effort adds up to something is the core of why we take on all the debt to begin with, and keep going, even when things get tough. It's hard to blame someone for feeling scammed when that doesn't work out. But no, recent grads aren't doomed. On average, the degree still pays. The all is lost version is as lazy as the everything is fine version. But it's just that the predictability that college used to come with is shakier than it's been in a long time, and nothing has replaced it. So you have a lot of people who followed every instruction, believe they personally screwed up, when most of them didn't. When one person can't find a job, that's a story about that person. When a whole generation is struggling to find jobs, that's a story about the structure we're all standing on.